On the morning of September 30, 1999, at a nuclear plant in Tokaimura, Japan, a 35-year-old man named Hisashi Ouchi and two other workers were working to clean uranium to make fuel rods for a special kind of reactor. According to a report in the Washington Post that came out a few months later, Ouchi was standing next to a big container, holding a funnel, while another worker named Masato Shinohara was pouring a mix of uranium stuff from a bucket into the container. Suddenly, they saw a flash of blue light, which was the first sign that something really bad was about to happen. These workers didn't have experience dealing with this strong kind of uranium before. They made a mistake and added too much of it into the container. A 2000 article in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists explains this. Because of this mistake, they accidentally set off a dangerous situation called a criticality. Ouchi, who was very close to the nuclear reaction, got exposed to a huge amount of radiation. This was probably one of the worst cases of radiation exposure in the history of nuclear accidents. He was about to experience something really terrible that would become an important lesson about the dangers of nuclear energy. The most important thing to learn from this is that when you're working with certain materials that can cause nuclear reactions, there are specific limits to how much you can use safely, explains Edwin Lyman, a scientist who knows a lot about nuclear power safety. He wrote an article with his colleague Stephen Dawley in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, talking about this incident. This means that the uranium started giving off radiation in a way the CIF safety rules aren't taught and followed carefully. There's a chance that a really bad accident can happen, says Lyman. This wasn't the first time this kind of accident had occurred. A report from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 2000 mentioned that before what happened in Tokaimura, there had been 21 similar accidents between 1953 and 1997. After the accident, the two workers quickly left the room, as the Washington Post wrote. But the harm was already done. Ouchi, who was closest to the reaction, got a huge amount of radiation. People have given different guesses about exactly how much, but a presentation in 2010 by Masashi Kanamori from the Japan Atomic Energy Agency said it was probably between 16 and 25 Gray equivalents, a way to measure radiation. Shinohara, who was about 18 inches, 46 centimeters, away, got a bit less, but still really harmful dose, maybe about 6 to 9 Gray equivalents. Another guy who was farther away got even less radiation. Some articles on the internet call Ouchi the most radioactive man in history, or something like that, but nuclear expert Lyman doesn't quite agree with that statement. Couldn't control, like a chain reaction. The estimated doses for Ouchi were among the highest known, though I'm not sure if it's the highest, explains Lyman. These typically occur in these kinds of criticality accidents. The radiation dose in a criticality accident can be even worse than in a catastrophic accident at a nuclear power plant, such as the 1986 reactor explosion at Chernobyl in Ukraine, then a part of the Soviet Union, where the radiation was dispersed. Even so, 28 people eventually died from radiation exposure. These criticality accidents present the potential for delivery of a large amount of radiation in a short period of time, though a burst of neutrons and gamma rays, Lyman says. That one burst, if you're close enough, you can sustain more than a lethal dose of radiation in seconds. So that's the scary thing about it. High doses of radiation damage the body, rendering it unable to make new cells, so that the bone marrow, for example, stops making the red blood cells that carry oxygen and the white blood cells that fight infection, according to Lyman. Your fate is predetermined, even though there will be a delay, he says, if you have a high enough dose of ionizing radiation that will kill cells, to the extent that your organs will not function. According to an October 1999 account in medical journal BMJ, the irradiated workers were taken to the National Institute of Radiological Sciences in Chiba, just east of Tokyo. There, it was determined that their lymphatic blood count had dropped to almost zero. Their symptoms included nausea, dehydration, and diarrhea. 3 days later, they were transferred to University of Tokyo Hospital, where doctors tried various measures in a desperate effort to save their lives. When Aoki, a handsome, powerfully built, former high school rugby player who had a wife and young son, arrived at the hospital, he didn't yet look like a victim of intense radiation exposure, according to A Slow Death, 83 Days of Radiation Sickness, a 2002 book by a team of journalists from Japan's NHK TV, later translated into English by Meiho Harada. His face was slightly red and swollen and his eyes were bloodshot, but he didn't have any blisters or burns, though he complained of pain in his ears and hand. The doctor who examined him even thought that it might be possible to save his life. But within a day, Aoki's condition got worse. He began to require oxygen, and his abdomen swelled, according to the book. Things continued downhill after he arrived at the University of Tokyo Hospital. 6 days after the accident, a specialist who looked at images of the chromosomes in Aoki's bone marrow cells saw only scattered black dots, indicating that they were broken into pieces. Aoki's body wouldn't be able to generate new cells. A week after the accident, Aoki received a peripheral blood stem cell transplant, with his sister volunteering as a donor. Nevertheless, Aoki's condition continued to deteriorate, according to the book. He began to complain of thirst, and when medical tape was removed from his chest, his skin started coming off with it. He began developing blisters. Tests showed that the radiation had killed the chromosomes that normally would enable his skin to regenerate, so that his epidermis, the outer layer that protected his body, gradually vanished. The pain became intense. He began experiencing breathing problems as well. 2 weeks after the accident, he was no longer able to eat, and had to be fed intravenously. 2 months into his ordeal, his heart stopped, though doctors were able to revive him. On December 21, at 11:21 p.m., Aoki's body finally gave out. According to Lyman's and Dolly's article, he died of multiple organ failure. Japan's Prime Minister at the time, Keizo Obuchi, issued a statement expressing his condolences to the worker's family and promised to improve nuclear safety measures, according to Japan Times. Shinohara, Aoki's co-worker, died in April 2000 of multiple organ failure as well, according to The Guardian. The Japanese government's investigation concluded that the accident's main causes included inadequate regulatory oversight, lack of an appropriate safety culture, and inadequate worker training and qualification, according to this April 2000 report by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. 6 officials from the company that operated the plant were charged with professional negligence and violating nuclear safety laws. In 2003, a court gave them suspended prison terms, and the company and at least one of the officials also were assessed fines, according to the Sydney Morning Herald.